Picture the city of Jerusalem on a clear morning. The Temple Mount rises above everything, white limestone and gold leaf catching the early sun so hard it hurts to look at. And at the very top of the southern wall, where the royal portico drops straight down into the Kidron Valley below, a man is standing on the edge. He has not eaten in 40 days. His name is Jesus of Nazareth, and the figure standing beside him, the one who brought him here, to this specific ledge, at this specific height, opens his mouth and quotes the Bible. Not just any passage. He quotes Psalm 91. For he will command his angels concerning you, the devil says, looking at the Son of God, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jump, he is saying. The psalm says you will be caught. Now, stop there. Because before we go one step further into that wilderness confrontation, before we understand what Jesus said back, we need to understand why the enemy of God knew this psalm well enough to quote it from memory. We need to understand what Psalm 91 actually is, where it came from, who it was written for, and why it has been prayed by warriors and plague survivors and condemned prisoners for 3,000 years. Because here is what nobody tells you about Psalm 91. It is not a lucky charm. It is not a guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen to you. It is not a poem written for people who have never suffered. It is something far stranger and far more powerful than that. There is also a voice in this psalm that most people never notice. Not the psalmist's voice, a different voice entirely. It does not appear until the very last 3 verses, and when it finally speaks, when you realize who is actually talking, it will change everything you thought this psalm was about. We will get to that voice, but not yet. Stay with me. To understand Psalm 91, you have to go back roughly 3,400 years, back to a desert, back to a man standing at the foot of a mountain with 2 million people behind him and no map forward. His name is Moses. Most Bible readers know that Psalm 90 is explicitly credited to Moses. It says so right in the heading. A prayer of Moses, the man of God. It is the oldest psalm in the entire collection. And Psalm 91 follows immediately after it, with no author listed. Jewish tradition, going back centuries before Christ, attributed Psalm 91 to Moses as well. The 2 psalms were written together as a pair, one the dark side, one the light. Here is what makes that pairing extraordinary. Psalm 90 opens with words that will make your chest heavy. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And then, within 6 verses, Moses turns to the human condition and says this: our days may come to 70 years, or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away. We are dust, Moses says. We are breath. We are a watch in the night. And then, immediately, the very next psalm. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. You can almost hear Moses set down one pen and pick up another. He has just described the smallness of human life, and now he is pointing to the one place where smallness does not have the final word. The Hebrew in that opening verse is doing something remarkable. Two throne names of God appear in a single breath. El Elyon, the Most High, the name that means the God above all other thrones, the God over every empire and every army that has ever drawn breath, and Shaddai, the Almighty. Scholars have debated the root of Shaddai for centuries. Some trace it to the Hebrew word for mountain. Strength, immovability, the God who cannot be moved. Others trace it to a word meaning breast, the God who nurses, who nourishes, who shelters the way a mother shelters a child against her body. Both are in that word at once, the God who is an immovable mountain and a mother's embrace, in the same breath. In the first verse, Moses knew what he was doing. Now picture the wilderness camp where this psalm was first prayed. 2 million people living in tents. The tabernacle at the center, the portable tent sanctuary where God's presence, the Shekinah, physically rested. Above it, a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, and around it, on all four sides, the tribes of Israel, each in their assigned position, each tent opening facing the tabernacle. To dwell in the shelter of the Most High was not a metaphor to these people. It was geography. It meant your tent was positioned toward the presence. It meant every morning when you opened your flap, the first thing you saw was the cloud. But here is what most people miss. Not everyone chose that position. Numbers chapter 14. Israel at the border of Canaan. The spies return. 10 of them say the land cannot be taken. And in one afternoon, an entire generation decides, without saying it out loud, that they will not dwell. They will not trust. They will not position themselves toward the presence. And for 40 years they wandered, and they died in the desert. The psalm is not passive. It never was. He who dwells, the Hebrew implies continuous, habitual action. Not a one-time prayer. Not a moment of crisis faith. A posture. A daily, deliberate choice to orient yourself toward the shadow of the Almighty. The people who refused that posture have no story, just numbers, just graves in the sand. Moses buried them. And then he wrote this psalm. So here is the pattern we have found so far, and we are only at the beginning. Psalm 91 is not a passive promise handed to anyone who reads it. It is a covenant position. The shelter is real. The shadow is real. The protection is real. But the operative word in verse 1 is dwells. Present tense, continuous, habitual. A choice made not once in a moment of terror, but daily, in the ordinary, before the crisis ever arrives. Moses knew this. He watched an entire generation forfeit it. And there is still so much more ahead. The warriors who prayed this psalm before battle. The king who spread an impossible letter before the Lord and watched an army of 185,000 disappear overnight. The ancient scroll found in a cave near the Dead Sea that will tell you exactly why the devil knew these verses well enough to quote them from memory. If this is your first time here, subscribe. Because we are just getting started. Several hundred years after Moses buried the wilderness generation in the sand, a younger man picked up where he left off. His name was Joshua. Joshua had watched Moses die on the wrong side of the Jordan River. He had stood at the edge of Canaan as a young spy, one of only 2 men in the entire camp who believed the land could be taken. He had waited 40 years. 40 years, while everyone around him who had refused to dwell died one by one in the desert. And then, at somewhere between 80 and 90 years old, God looked at Joshua and said, "Now." What followed is one of the most militarily improbable campaigns in the ancient world. Jericho, a fortified city with walls thick enough to build houses on top of, fell without a single battering ram. The sun stood still over the valley of Ajalon while Joshua finished a battle he needed daylight to complete. City after city fell, not because Joshua had superior weapons, not because his army was better trained, but because, as the text records again and again, Joshua did exactly what the Lord commanded. He dwelled. He stayed positioned. He did not divide left or right. Psalm 91 verse 7 was not poetry to Joshua. It was a field report. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. He had seen it, literally, in actual battles, with actual bodies on actual ground. Now here is what most people miss about that verse. It is not promising you will never be in danger. Read it again. 1,000 fall at your side. You are in the middle of the battle. The people next to you are dying. The promise is not absence from the field. The promise is presence on the field with a different outcome. Protection is not removal from danger. Protection is the shadow of the Almighty moving with you through it. Joshua understood this. He never once prayed to be kept out of the fight. But it gets stranger. Fast forward roughly 700 years. A king named Hezekiah sits in Jerusalem with a letter in his hands. The letter is from Sennacherib, king of Assyria, the most powerful military force on earth at that moment. Sennacherib has already destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. He has taken 46 Judean cities. His army, by his own records carved in stone, records we have actually found and can read today, numbers in the hundreds of thousands. And the letter in Hezekiah's hand says, in plain language, Jerusalem is next. Your God cannot save you. Every other god of every other nation I have destroyed failed their people. Yours will too. Hezekiah walks into the temple. He spreads the letter out on the floor before the ark of God like a man laying evidence before a judge. And he prays. Not a long prayer, not a sophisticated prayer. He simply says, "Look at this. You are God, they are not. Do something." That night, the angel of the Lord moves through the Assyrian camp. By morning, 185,000 soldiers are dead. Sennacherib goes home. He never comes back. His own sons assassinate him in his own temple shortly after. The empire that was going to erase Jerusalem from the map dissolves from within. 2 Kings chapter 19. You can read it tonight. Hezekiah did not have superior weapons. He had the same thing Moses had, the same thing Joshua had, a posture, a deliberate turning toward the presence, a choice, in the worst moment of his life, with an impossible enemy at the gate, to dwell. Pay attention to this next part. In the 1940s, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard something shatter. What archaeologists eventually recovered from that cave, and the ones around it, became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest surviving manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible ever found, predating the previously known copies by roughly 1,000 years. Among the scrolls was a document scholars now call 11Q11. It is a collection of psalms used in Second Temple Judaism for a specific purpose. The title, translated from the Hebrew, means roughly, Songs Against Demons, an exorcism liturgy, and Psalm 91 is in it. For at least 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus, this psalm was being deployed, specifically, deliberately, against demonic oppression. Priests and rabbis and ordinary Jewish families used these words as a weapon against the unseen world, which means something important. It means the devil did not stumble across Psalm 91 in the wilderness when he was tempting Jesus. He had heard it for centuries, directed at him. He knew every word. He knew the cadence of it the way a soldier knows the sound of the weapon pointed at his chest. And so, standing on the pinnacle of the temple with the exhausted Son of God beside him, he did the only thing left to do. He tried to use the weapon against the one who wrote it. Go back to the pinnacle. Jesus has been in the Judean wilderness for 40 days. No food, no shelter worth speaking of. The same desert where Moses wandered. The same sand where the faithless generation died. And at the end of those 40 days, at the moment of maximum physical weakness, the devil comes. He has already tried twice. He tried appetite. Turn these stones to bread. He tried ambition, all the kingdoms of the world if you bow. Both failed. And so now he tries something different. He tries theology. He brings Jesus to the highest point of the temple, the southeastern corner of the royal portico, where the drop to the Kidron Valley below is somewhere between 100 and 150 feet of sheer stone. And he opens his mouth and quotes the word of God. For he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Psalm 91 verses 11 and 12. Now, listen carefully, because the devil does something here that is easy to miss if you are reading quickly. He quotes the psalm accurately. The words are correct, but he has performed a surgical removal. He has taken the promise entirely out of its covenant context. He has stripped verse 11 from the condition that governs the entire psalm. The condition stated in verse 1, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High. Dwelling is not jumping. Dwelling is not manufacturing a crisis to force God's hand. Dwelling is not using the promises of God as leverage to demand a performance. The devil took a covenant and tried to turn it into a contract. He took a relationship and tried to flatten it into a transaction. Jesus does not argue about the psalm. He does not say the promise is false. He says something more precise. It is also written, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." In other words, you have quoted the psalm correctly. You have simply misunderstood what it is for. And here is where Augustine of Hippo, writing in the 4th century, says something that stopped me cold when I first read it. Augustine argues that Psalm 91 is not primarily about any individual believer. It is about the Messiah, the you addressed throughout the psalm, the one the angels will protect, the one who will tread on the lion and the serpent, the one God promises to rescue, is ultimately Jesus himself, which is exactly why Satan could quote it to Jesus. He was quoting a psalm about the man standing in front of him. And now we reach the voice. The voice I told you about at the beginning. The one that does not belong to the psalmist. The one that does not appear until the final 3 verses. Read the psalm again and notice the shift. For 90% of the text, someone is speaking about God. He will cover you. He will command his angels. He will protect you. Third person, reported. Description from a distance. And then verse 14 arrives. And the voice changes entirely. Because he loves me, God says, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. God steps into his own psalm and speaks. Not about the one who dwells, to the one who dwells directly, personally, first person. Think about what that means. Think about a parent. You may be one, or you may have had one, who watches their child walk into something dangerous. A diagnosis, a broken marriage, a deployment, a season so dark you cannot see the bottom of it. The parent cannot remove the danger, cannot take the place of the child in it. But there is one thing the parent can do that changes everything. The parent can enter it with them, not around trouble. The text is exact. I will be with him in trouble. The preposition matters. God does not promise to relegate you out of the storm. He promises to be present inside it. The shadow of the Almighty is not a roof over a safe house. It is the shadow cast by a body that has stepped between you and whatever is coming. And here is the thing about that image that will not leave me alone. The first person to receive that promise, because he loves me, I will rescue him, was the son standing on the pinnacle. Hungry, exhausted, the devil quoting God's own words back at him. The Father did not speak from heaven in that moment. He did not send angels to the ledge. He let the test run. And Jesus, who is the fulfillment of this psalm, who is the one the angels were always assigned to, who will later tread on the serpent in the most literal sense imaginable. Jesus stood there and trusted and did not jump. That is what dwelling looks like at its most extreme. Not comfort, not rescue from the edge. Standing on the edge with the full weight of the promise underneath you and choosing not to manufacture the proof. 3 things to take with you. First, Psalm 91 is a covenant psalm, not a contract. A contract says, if you perform correctly, I will deliver the goods. A covenant says, if you stay close to me, I will stay close to you. The condition in verse 1 is not moral perfection. It is not a checklist. It is a posture. He who dwells. The people who forfeit the protection of this psalm do not forfeit it by sinning too much. They forfeit it by drifting, by slowly, quietly repositioning their tent so the opening no longer faces the presence. The shelter is still there. They just stopped living in it. Second, you are not promised a danger-free life. Not in this psalm, not anywhere in Scripture. 1,000 fall at your side. You are on the field when that happens. Hezekiah still got the letter. Jesus still stood on the pinnacle. The promise is not immunity from the hard thing. The promise is accompaniment through it. There is a difference between a God who removes every obstacle and a God who walks every road. The psalm gives you the second one. And if you have ever been in a season where the first one did not show up, this may be why the psalm still felt true anyway. Third, the same father who watched his own son stand exhausted on a stone ledge with the devil quoting scripture at him and did not intervene to stop it is the one who steps into the final verses of this psalm and says, in his own voice, I will be with him in trouble. Not above it, not watching from a distance. In it, that is not the God of easy circumstances. That is the God of actual presence. And actual presence, it turns out, is the only thing that has ever been enough. Which verse of Psalm 91 has carried you through a hard season? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this reached you today, share it with someone who needs it. And I will see you in the next one.